The air was heavy with the scent of roasted chestnuts drifting from a cart near the corner of Fulton Street. Early evening shadows stretched long across the cracked pavement, the glow of streetlights catching in puddles left by a sudden autumn rain. Theo Callahan kept his coat collar turned up, his pace quick but deliberate, weaving through the clusters of commuters spilling out of the subway. He had walked this route hundreds of times, yet tonight each step felt different. There was a certain weight in the air, a tension that clung to him as if the city itself was holding its breath. Ahead, the familiar storefronts lined the street, the old bookstore with its crooked sign, the dimly lit diner where he sometimes took his coffee, the pawn shop with barred windows and the constant flicker of its neon light. Theo's eyes kept scanning the faces around him. Somewhere in this crowd was a man he had not seen in nearly a decade, a man whose sudden reappearance had set Theo's life tilting off its axis. It was not fear exactly, but something colder, sharper, running beneath his skin. He clutched the small paper bag in his hand tighter. Inside was something that felt both ridiculous and dangerous, a last-minute purchase from a corner shop that would have seemed laughable under any other circumstances. A gust of wind rattled the street signs and sent a swirl of discarded newspapers skittering over the asphalt. Theo stopped just short of the alley mouth beside the diner. In the shadows stood a tall figure, motionless, waiting. A flicker of recognition stirred in his mind. The same sharp jawline, the same stance, even after all these years. His chest tightened. The street noise seemed to fade. He took a step forward, his boots echoing against the wet ground. The figure shifted slightly, the dull gleam of a lighter sparking to life, illuminating a face that pulled Theo straight back to another time, another place, and a decision he wished he could forget. The paper bag in Theo's hand rustled as he tightened his grip. It was absurd that something so ordinary could suddenly feel like the only line between him and whatever this night was about to become. In the space between two heartbeats, the man in the alley spoke. His voice was calm, almost casual, but beneath it was an edge that made Theo's pulse quicken. The city seemed to hold its breath again. Theo stood at the edge of the alley, his breath forming pale clouds in the cool air. The man's face was older than he remembered, lines carved deep around the mouth and eyes, but the gaze was unchanged, steady, assessing, and without warmth. "You've been avoiding me," the man said. His voice had the roughness of too many late nights and too much whiskey, each word deliberate, weighted. Theo's mind flicked back to a night long ago, to a narrow stairwell in Brooklyn, to the sound of hurried footsteps and the slam of a metal door. He had not been avoiding him then, he had been running for his life. But now, standing here, there was nowhere to run without making it obvious. "What do you want, Mason?" Theo asked, his voice low. The man's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "You still owe me. And now you're going to pay." From inside his coat, Mason pulled a small envelope. The paper looked worn, creased, as if it had been handled too many times. He held it out between two fingers. Theo did not move to take it. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder at the slow trickle of pedestrians still passing on Fulton Street. None of them looked this way. "You'll read it," Mason said. "Then you'll decide whether you walk away tonight or whether this city swallows you whole." Theo felt the paper bag in his hand grow heavier, though he knew it hadn't changed. He took the envelope, the coarse paper cold against his fingertips. Mason stepped back into the shadow, watching him with an almost patient menace. Theo tore the envelope open. Inside was a single photograph, its edges curling. The image was of a dimly lit apartment. He recognized the brick wall, the crooked blinds, but what caught his breath was the figure standing in the corner. A woman, head turned away, hair falling across her face. The sound of a car horn from the street snapped Theo's attention back, but Mason was already speaking again. "You've got until midnight. After that, the choice is no longer yours." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the alley. Theo stood alone, the photograph in one hand, the paper bag in the other, the cold pressing in around him. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed. He began to walk, not sure whether he was moving toward the answer or toward the trouble Mason had promised. Theo's footsteps carried him deeper into lower Manhattan, away from the familiar glow of Fulton Street and into streets where the lamps cast longer, lonelier shadows. His mind circled the photograph like a predator, turning it over in thought though it stayed folded in his coat pocket. The woman. He knew her. Or rather, he had known her once, before her name became something you whispered only in back rooms. Her name was Lena Torres, and years ago she had been the one person who could have pulled Theo out of the life he was drowning in. Instead, she vanished without warning, swallowed by the city's unspoken rules and the men who enforced them. And now Mason had her image, standing in a place Theo recognized all too well, the derelict apartment above the old tailor shop on Delancey Street. The rain began again, fine needles of cold striking his face. He ducked into the glow of a late-night bodega, the bell above the door jingling. A few customers milled about, their voices low. Theo moved to the back, grabbing a bottle of water to mask his real purpose for being there. He needed to think without the city breathing down his neck. In the corner, a small television murmured news headlines. His attention caught for only a second before the shopkeeper called from behind the counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Callahan." Theo looked up sharply. The man was old, eyes clouded with age but sharp beneath it. "Just a long day," Theo replied. The shopkeeper's gaze flicked to the paper bag Theo still carried. "Be careful what you carry. In this city, even the smallest thing can get you killed." Theo paid for the water and stepped back into the rain. The words lingered in his mind. By the time he reached Delancey Street, his pulse had steadied, his focus narrowing. He stood across from the tailor shop, its windows dark, its upper floor even darker. Somewhere in that silence, Lena was either waiting or already lost. The photograph burned in his pocket. He would have to go inside. The rain-slicked pavement gleamed under the sparse glow of street lamps as Theo crossed Delancey Street. The tailor's shop loomed ahead, its sign faded and barely readable, the shutters drawn tight. Above, the single cracked window of the apartment reflected nothing but the dim city light, giving no hint of what lay beyond. Theo paused at the doorway, glancing both ways along the street. A lone taxi rolled past, tires whispering on wet asphalt, and then the silence returned. He reached for the old brass handle, finding it unlocked. The faint creak of hinges followed him inside. The shop smelled of dust and disuse, the air thick with the scent of fabric long left to decay. Rows of mannequins stood like silent witnesses in the gloom, their faceless heads turned toward him. Each step stirred motes of dust that drifted lazily in the faint light from the street. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard groaned. Theo moved towards the back, where a narrow staircase rose steeply into shadow. The paper bag in his hand felt heavier still, though its contents remained unchanged. He set his foot on the first step, the wood soft beneath him. Another sound reached him then, the faint scrape of movement above, deliberate and slow. Halfway up, a door at the top opened just enough for a sliver of light to spill into the darkness. "Theo," a woman's voice whispered, low and urgent. His chest tightened at the sound. He stepped into the narrow corridor above, the peeling wallpaper and dim single bulb doing little to chase away the cold. Lena stood at the far end, her hair longer than he remembered, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," she said. He took a step toward her, but she raised a hand to stop him. From behind her, a shadow moved, another figure, taller, emerging from the darkened room. Theo's gut clenched as the figure stepped forward into the weak light, revealing a face he had hoped never to see again. It was not Mason. It was worse. The figure filled the doorway behind Lena, his shoulders broad, his expression carved from stone. A deep scar ran from the corner of his left eye to the line of his jaw, a permanent reminder of the kind of life he led. Theo knew him at once, Daniel Vega, the enforcer from Red Hook whose name traveled in whispers across the East River. Lena's eyes flicked between them, tension pulling her features tight. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, but her voice trembled just enough to betray her. Vega stepped forward, his boots heavy on the warped floorboards. "Callahan," he said, as if tasting the name. "Been a while. Mason said you'd show." Theo's fingers tightened around the paper bag until the crinkle of it filled the silence. "Then you know I didn't come here for you." Vega smirked, though there was no humor in it. "You came here because you don't know when to stay buried. Mason's got his reasons. I've got mine. And she," he jerked his chin toward Lena, "is the hinge that swings both doors." Lena flinched at his words. Theo took a step forward, forcing Vega's gaze to lock on his. The distance between them felt like a fuse waiting to burn down. From somewhere outside came the distant wail of another siren, a reminder that the city was still moving, still alive, even while this moment hung suspended. Vega reached into his coat, pulling out a small, battered notebook and tossing it onto a rickety table between them. The book landed with a soft thud, pages splaying open. Inside were names, dates, amounts, and there, in black ink, neat and deliberate, Theo's own name. Debt, Vega said simply. Everyone pays, one way or another. Theo felt the pull of two choices, neither of them clean. He could leave now, walk back into the wet streets and try to disappear again. Or he could stay, tear the fuse from the fire, and see what burned first. He already knew which one he'd choose. Theo reached into his coat and placed the paper bag on the table beside the battered notebook. The sound it made was soft, almost harmless, yet Vega's eyes narrowed as though it might hold something far more dangerous than its size suggested. "You've been clutching that since you walked in," Vega said. "What is it?" Theo didn't answer. Instead, he eased the bag open just enough for the dim bulb to catch the glint of what lay inside. Vega's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of recognition passing over his scarred face. Lena's gaze darted from one man to the other. "Theo, tell me you didn't." He cut her off with a look. "You told me once there's only one way to stop Mason," he said quietly. "I listened." Vega took a slow step closer, his shadow stretching long across the warped floorboards. "You've no idea what you're holding." Theo's pulse thudded in his ears. "I know enough." For a long moment, no one moved. The rain tapped steadily against the cracked window. Then Vega's hand twitched toward the bag, too quick, too deliberate, and Theo's other hand shot out, gripping the notebook and snapping it shut. "That's mine," Vega growled. "Not anymore," Theo said. From the corner of his vision, Theo saw Lena shift her weight, her hand disappearing into the folds of her coat. Her voice was low but steady. "You both need to leave. Now." The way she said it made Theo's skin crawl. Whatever side she was on, it wasn't his, not yet. And outside, somewhere beyond the rain and streetlight, Theo could swear he heard footsteps approaching the building. The sound grew clearer, heavy boots splashing through puddles, unhurried yet purposeful. Vega's head tilted, his attention shifting to the door at the far end of the corridor. Theo slipped the notebook into his coat, his free hand still resting lightly on the paper bag. Lena's eyes flickered toward the stairs. "If you stay, you'll meet them head-on. If you go now, you might still make it out." "Who?" Theo asked. She didn't answer. The footsteps reached the front of the building, pausing just long enough for the faint scrape of metal against wood to reach them. A lock being tested. Vega moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see the street. Rain glistened off the hood of a dark sedan idling at the curb. In its reflection, Theo caught sight of two figures in long coats, their faces hidden, their posture unmistakable, men accustomed to walking into rooms they might not leave. "They're not here for me," Vega muttered. "Which means, Callahan, they're here for you." Theo's grip on the bag tightened. "Mason's sending them." The knock came then, not polite, not tentative. 3 hard raps that seemed to shake the frame. Lena stepped between them, her voice cutting through the thick air. "Upstairs. Now." Without waiting for agreement, she turned and disappeared into the narrow stairwell that climbed to the attic. Vega followed, throwing one last glance at Theo. The knocking turned into pounding. The old door groaned under the force. Theo backed toward the stairs, the sound of splintering wood chasing him upward. By the time he reached the attic, the first crash echoed through the building. Somewhere below, the strangers had come inside. The attic was low-ceilinged and smelled of dust and oil. Faded trunks were stacked against the slanted walls, their brass clasps dull with age. Rain pattered against the roof just overhead, the sound amplified in the confined space. Lena moved quickly, kneeling beside one of the trunks and lifting the lid to reveal an assortment of worn coats, tools, and a small steel lockbox. Vega closed the attic door behind them, pushing a heavy beam across it as a makeshift brace. Theo stood in the center, the notebook still hidden in his coat, the paper bag clutched in his hand. "What's in the box?" he asked. "Not now," Lena said sharply. "They'll search the building floor by floor." Vega crossed to the narrow window at the far end, peering out over the fire escape. Streets blocked. Sedan out front, another one at the corner. No clean exit. Theo's eyes moved to Lena. "You brought me here knowing they'd follow." She didn't deny it. "You're the only one who can get what Mason wants without ending up in the river. That bag you're holding, it's more than a bargaining chip. It's the only way out for all of us." The pounding below grew louder. Floorboards creaked. Voices carried, low, deliberate commands in tones that brooked no argument. Vega turned from the window. "We've got maybe 2 minutes." Lena opened the lockbox, pulling out a faded map of Lower Manhattan. Several buildings were circled in red ink, one of them just a few blocks from here. She jabbed a finger at it. "If we get there, we can end this before midnight." Theo stared at the map, then at the paper bag. He could feel the shape of what was inside pressing through the thin paper, small, solid, and far more dangerous than it looked. The attic door shuddered under the first blow. Vega looked at him. "Time to decide, Callahan. Stay and fight, or run and finish it." Theo already knew there was no safe choice. The second blow to the attic door rattled the beam in its brackets. Dust drifted down from the rafters. Theo crossed the room in 3 strides, peering through the small window Vega had used moments before. The fire escape clung to the building's side like an iron skeleton, its rungs slick with rain. "They won't expect us to go up," Vega said. Theo frowned. "Up leads nowhere." "Not if you know the rooftops," Vega replied, already forcing the window open with a metallic screech. Lena shoved the map into Theo's coat pocket and pushed the paper bag firmly into his chest. "Whatever happens, don't drop this. Not even if it means you get caught." Theo climbed through the window first, boots slipping slightly as they hit the wet grate. The wind bit at his face. Below, the voices were closer. The intruders had reached the upper floor. Vega followed, his weight making the fire escape groan. Then Lena, quick and quiet despite the rain. They ascended rather than descended, clambering to the top landing where the ladder reached the building's flat roof. From up here, the city sprawled in every direction, glowing windows, neon signs, steam rising from vents in the cold air. Behind them, the attic door gave way with a crash. Shouts erupted inside. "This way," Vega barked, sprinting across the slick tar roof toward a gap between buildings no wider than an alley. Theo followed, heart hammering, Lena just behind. The rain blurred the edge, making the leap seem farther than it was. Vega landed first, rolling to absorb the impact. Theo jumped, the paper bag thudding against his side as he landed. Lena followed, her boots skidding dangerously close to the edge before Vega caught her arm. Gunshots cracked the night air. The pursuers had reached the roof. They ran.